Hey, what's up guys, it's me Tobias here, and yeah, I know I've kind of been lagging it on the vlogs the past couple days, but don't worry, it's all for a good reason. You know, I have a new cover coming out tomorrow on Thursday, and I'm pretty excited for that, and I think it came out really great. Anyways, for today's video, what I wanted to go over is how to use your DSLR camera for filming video. Now, I just want to start by saying I'm not an expert on photography or videography, or I'm not an expert on like DSLR cameras. This is actually the first DSLR camera I've ever had. It is the Nikon D5300, and I think it's pretty good. I have a 35mm lens. Show you right there. So guys, the ironic thing about this video is that a lot of it will be filmed with my iPhone, which I'm using right now, or this camera right here. So when filming a video with your DSLR camera, the 4 things I think you should know are the shutter speed you should use, the aperture, the ISO, and the lock exposure. So right off the bat guys, like if you want to get kind of like that cinematic look, or like the look that you get in like movies or films, you should probably be filming in 24 frames per second. So this is how you change your frame rate. And then in here is where you could change your frame rate. There's like different frame rates you could choose. So this is what we're going to use right here. 1080 at 24 frames per second. Now with this camera, the D5300, you can also film in 60 frames per second or 30 frames per second. The higher the frame rate you use, like 30 frames per second and 24 frames per second are pretty close, but 60 frames per second, you should probably try to use like a pretty high shutter speed. But right now, let's just talk about 24 frames per second. Now, if you look at your camera, this is how you adjust the shutter speed. This little wheel right here will allow you to adjust your shutter speed just by moving it like this. As you move the wheel, you'll notice that these numbers down here change. That is your shutter speed. Basically, when you're filming at 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second, the shutter speed you want to use is 160. And this has to do with a rule called the rule of 180 degrees. If you want to like look further into that, go ahead and Google that, the rule of 180 degrees in regards to shutter speed. Just Google that and you can learn all about it, but I'm not going to get into it in this video. And if you're filming at a higher frame per second rate, like 60 frames per second, you want to use a higher shutter speed. And the shutter speed, that's more of like a set it and leave it kind of setting, in my opinion. Once again, I'm no expert. You don't have to leave the shutter speed, but I mean, typically I leave the shutter speed at 160. The second thing you should know is the aperture. The aperture has to do with like how much light the camera is letting in. So if you look at the lens of your camera, depending on the lens you have, you could go to the lowest number aperture. Sometimes people also refer to the aperture as the f-stop. And if you look at your lens on your camera, it'll have like a little number, and that'll, on mine it says 1.8, and that's pretty much the biggest like aperture I can have. So my lens can let in quite a bit of light. So pretty much like the lower the number, the bigger the opening will be to let in light. And the higher the number, the smaller the hole will be to let in light. So this is how you change the aperture on your camera. Look for this little plus and minus button, hold that, and while you're holding it, scroll through with this wheel. The middle number is your aperture, and you can see that there's a visual diagram of the tightness of the circle and when it is completely open. So pretty much the rule for this is that when you're filming in lower light, you want to have the opening really big. So the biggest I can have is 1.8, and if you're filming in like a really bright environment, you might want to shoot like with a bigger number, like maybe 5 or maybe even higher than that. But it depends on, like, you want to use your eye to like determine that. The third thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is the ISO or the ISO. The ISO is pretty much how sensitive your camera is to the light that is present. So if you have low light, you want to use a really high ISO. If you have a lot of light or adequate light, you can have a lower ISO. These two things, like aperture and ISO, they kind of work hand in hand with each other. So yeah, here we go guys. Let me just show you what I'm talking about. So this right here is tells you what your ISO is set to. To change your ISO, just click this button right here with the eye on it. So I'm going to click that, and then you can move around the cursor and you can select these different things. Your ISO is this one right here, so click OK, and then you can choose what ISO you want. So another rule about choosing your ISO number, it should be a multiple of 160, so 160, 320, 640, and so on. And once again, you shouldn't go over 1600 unless you're in like really low light. Then you can go over, but I mean 1600 is already like pretty high. I usually don't go over 1600. Okay guys, now the fourth thing that I want to talk about is called lock exposure, and let me give you a little demonstration with this camera of why you should know how to lock the exposure. Alright guys, so it looks pretty good filming over here, right? This is without the lock exposure on. But then when I move the camera and look at this sofa over here, which is black, it gets a little noisy in the black area. Now let's try this again. I'll turn the lock exposure on, so now the exposure is locked. And then when I move the camera over here to the sofa again, it stays black. It's dark, but it stays black. There's no noise. This is how you turn on the lock exposure and how you use it. First, click the menu button on your camera. Go to the custom settings menu, scroll up to timers/AE lock, scroll to all the way down to, where is it? Assign AEL AFL button, and you want to have it on AE lock hold. So whenever you're filming and you want to lock the exposure to avoid, the video either darkening or brightening or getting noise like that, click this button right here. It's located right here, the top right next to the spinny wheel thing, AEL AFL, just click that. The reason that and of course I'm filming with an iPhone, so there's all this noise in the background. But yeah, so the reason that there's no noise the second time is because I turned on the lock exposure and it kept the sofa black. Anyways guys, those are the 4 things that I think you should know about when you are filming with your DSLR camera. I hope that helps you out. And I will talk to you tomorrow, guys. Remember, guys, check out my cover of Fake Love by Drake that I'm posting on Thursday. And if you've never seen any of my other videos, guys, go ahead and check out my channel. I do daily vlogs, I do covers, I do the occasional review from time to time. And if you like what you see there, guys, hit that subscribe button. And if you like this video, if this video helped you out, please give me a like. I would really appreciate it. Anyways, I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Peace.